Okay, we are ready.
All right, all set to go here. All right, welcome to the April 18th meeting of the recently renamed Public Safety and Sanitation Committee. Matt Roberts, Chair of the committee. And tonight we are joined by Assistant District Manager Brendan Berth, and this meeting is called to order at 6:35 this evening. Reminder, New York State law requires all community board members who are not able to attend in person to have their cameras on with first and last names displayed till the meeting is adjourned. Members of the public attending virtually, you can raise any questions or comments you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. And if there's time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. All right, we still need a volunteer to take minutes tonight. So thank you, Eric, for stepping in last month.
Sure.
Is there anybody wishing to take minutes tonight?
And not Stu or Steve, because.
Right.
Not Stu or.
I'll do it.
And thanks. All right. And that brings us to the roll call. Brendan will conduct the roll call.
Committee members, I will call your name. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Stu Desser,
Present.
Eric Goldberg,
Present.
Rupal Kakad can't be with us tonight. Steve O,
Present.
Steve Perez,
Present.
Matt Roberts,
Present.
Ann Sullivan. She
heard something.
She is here. Ann Sullivan is here and is marked as present for the record. And Hydra Zaidi is not with us right now, but we do have a quorum.
All right. So the agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and it's on the screen before you. If there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda. If anyone objects, please raise your hand. All right, seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. Minutes from the March 21st meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If you have any corrections or changes, please raise your hand. Seeing none, the minutes are adopted and will soon be available on the CB6 website. All right, the ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members here in person. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll identify you so you can speak. Committee members unable to attend in person. If you have a question about committee business, raise your hand through Zoom. Of course, important that only one person speak at a time, so everybody can understand at home. And of course, the chat function should not be used for committee business. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. That brings us to the agenda. Tonight we have, first up, we have a presentation by the Midtown Community Justice Center regarding some of their programs for low-level offenses. We have Jordan Otis with us tonight to talk about that and let us know what the court kind of introduced them for those who are not familiar with the court and maybe answer some questions from the committee or the public. So just to kind of set the stage here, we had a couple of discussions on retail theft and recidivism a couple of months back. And of course, the Midtown Community Justice Center came up in that conversation as a potential vehicle or pathway for some of these low-level cases. A lot of the feedback we got a couple of months ago was that the courts just don't have enough resources to prosecute, and there's a backlog. So a lot of these cases just never even make it that far into the court system. So, so we also, and tonight also following the conversation with the Community Justice Center, we will be discussing some budget requests, which may also include some asks for funding for the justice system. So just keep that in mind as we go. So let's bring in Jordan Otis. Jordan, thanks so much for joining us, and glad you could be with us.
Good evening, everyone. I appreciate the invitation. Always a pleasure to talk with some of our folks and constituents in our neighborhoods, and I'm thrilled to be able to share a little bit about what we're doing at the Midtown Community Justice Center, both in terms of programming and some of the community-based initiatives that we have going on, and while I do have a PowerPoint, I'm very happy to make this conversational. And so if folks want to jump in, have any questions or anything at any point, because there's a lot of information I'll throw at you all tonight, definitely either raise your hand or just shout and I will pause. Sure. So I'm going to try to
Actually,
share.
alrighty. Do we have your presentation? Can you send it to the board office?
I can. We're making a couple minor formatting updates to it, and I want to make sure that those are in place, and then I'll be sure to follow up and get this out to
Okay,
you all.
just as the person doing the minutes, it's always super helpful.
No problem. And some of the things in this presentation are a little bit less relevant to today's conversation, and so you may hear me touch upon them just so you have the full scope of what's going on at Midtown. But I am happy to hone in on certain topics or concerns that you all have. So give me one moment as I try to pull this up. Okay, is everyone with me?
Yes.
Perfect. So Midtown. Midtown, I should say, was actually until very recently referred to as the Midtown Community Court. But as you'll hear tonight, we are doing so many things that happen outside of the courtroom that in December for our 30th anniversary, we actually pivoted to the Midtown Community Justice Center because we feel that the Justice Center title does a far better job kind of embodying what we do and how we approach some of our work, whether that is some of the social services that we offer, definitely in terms of some of the criminal justice programming that we offer, et cetera. But a little bit of history first. So Midtown was built in 1993 as a public and private partnership, built to better respond to some of the quality of life and public safety concerns that we were seeing in our local neighborhoods. And so really back then we're talking about some of the things that were going on in Times Square, some of the things that were going on in Hell's Kitchen that, definitely was a negative impact on public safety and quality of life, whether that was prostitution, whether that was drug use or drug sales, things along those lines. And so basically some folks came together and started to recognize that, what we had to offer back then, which was short-term jail sentences, fines, they weren't getting the job done. Folks were ending up back in the same spaces and in the same neighborhoods, often where they got arrested, doing the same behavior that led to their arrest. And so what we really started to see was that revolving door with folks having fewer and fewer choices and options each time they engaged with law enforcement or the justice system, and subsequently. So folks came together and started to offer community service and social services. You can probably imagine what that looked like back then. It was both of those options in its most, I guess, traditional sense, in that community service was bright green pennies on the side of the road, picking up trash. Social services were often one-on-one experiences with social workers or case managers, really trying to encourage folks to get to a vulnerable space that isn't necessarily easy for everyone that we work with. We've been pushing the envelope when it comes to not only sticking with the times, but staying at the kind of forefront of innovation when it comes to how we can offer social service and community service mandates. But we don't do this work alone. And so at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see a bunch of partners that we work with that make this work possible. Some of the core actors that you would expect: the Office of Court Administration, the District Attorney's Office, and Family Court are some of those court stakeholders. We also have the defense agencies that we work with, of course, representing folks that move through our spaces. In terms of NYPD and the community court, so we work with 6 precincts. That's the 10th, 13th, 17th, 20th, Midtown North and Midtown South. So that brings us from about 14th Street and on the west side up to about 89th. On the east side, that's up to about 60th Street. But that is river to river. So we have a decently large catchment area as well. And we also work with a bunch of community organizations I'll get into a little bit deeper in just a moment. But prior to COVID, we were truly a community court in its truest sense, in that if you were arrested, regardless of where you lived, if you were arrested in one of these 6 precincts, you were referred to and arraigned at Midtown Community Court. Now we are a bit more of a problem-solving court because at COVID, we were actually ordered to vacate the building early that Monday morning in March, and the building was turned upside down and was used exclusively for virtual court appearances for folks that either screened as testing positive for COVID or COVID symptoms. And so that meant everyone was getting arraigned downtown at 100 Center Street. And so for the past couple of years, we've been trying to reclaim some of that portfolio that we had at Midtown. And so now we're actually much more of a problem-solving court as we continue to try to reclaim our catchment area. And by problem-solving court, I mean that we're actually working with 2 main populations: folks that flag for serious mental illness within the criminal justice system that are already in the court process, and then 18 to 25-year-olds, that emerging adult adolescent population that are arrested in the entire borough. So we still do see some of the cases that are arrested in that catchment area that I mentioned. They're just referred to us at this moment from our partner site, Manhattan Justice Opportunities, that operates in 100 Center Street. But we've been promised by some of these stakeholders in the Office of Court, the Office of Court Administration, that we'll start to reclaim some of those geographic cases as well too. And so that's tremendous, because we now truly believe that we'll be able to provide local solutions to local problems yet again. But we also realize that we can do so much of this work outside of the courtroom as well. And so we also offer diversion programs, which give folks an opportunity to actually never step foot in the courtroom and really avoid some of the collateral consequences and trauma that also go hand in hand with being in a courtroom, and also get folks some more favorable outcomes. The largest one of those initiatives is Project Reset. And so that's a pre-arraignment diversion program that actually gives folks an opportunity to engage with us in programming after the arrest, but prior to arraignment. And that is a very proportionate program in that they only get 1 session, because we're really talking about low-level crimes here. We're talking about shoplifting. We're talking about trespassing, graffiti, possession of a controlled substance. And once they complete that group or workshop or mandate successfully, the district attorney's office actually declines to prosecute their case. And so Midtown Community Justice Center is operating Project Reset for the entire borough of Manhattan. And the Center for Justice Innovation, our parent organization, is actually the citywide provider across all 5 boroughs. At Midtown, we also offer a youth weapons diversion program, which works with young people ages 14 to 17 that are arrested on weapons possessions across the entire city. We have Community First, a street outreach initiative that operates in Times Square in partnership with Times Square Alliance, Breaking Ground, a street outreach provider, and Fountain House, a mental health support and provider. And then we have a bunch of community engagement initiatives also. Not only operating some mandated community service that focus on building transferable skills for clients, maintaining and operating socially significant projects that our communities and participants identify as socially significant. So not just projects that we're kind of prescribing to the community from our ivory tower saying this is what we're going to do for you, but actually a participatory planning model in which we can do projects that do resonate with folks. And then we do a lot of workshops out in the community as well, everything from resource fairs to skill building workshops for young people, enrichment workshops for seniors, things along those lines. And so all of this work really kind of encapsulates that switch from the Midtown Community Court, which exclusively operated in an alternative to incarceration space, to now the Midtown Community Justice Center, where we can operate up and down the criminal justice continuum, from prevention and diversion work of course, continuing the alternative to incarceration work, but also the support of community members, regardless of justice system involvement, and folks that are coming home as well. So I can dive in a bit deeper to some of these, especially as it relates to shoplifting and quality of life concerns, but I want to pause there to see if there are any questions at this point.
Yes, Jordan, do you have any kind of numbers or like what kind of percentages of the overall number of cases you're handling versus like the total?
Yeah, so I can pull those those for you and circle back in terms of the overall volume. Because that's coming from a couple different spaces. But I do want to share that or what I can tell you now, and I can pull up the exact numbers if you give me one moment.
Yeah, just an estimate is fine.
Yeah, no problem. So some of our numbers, and I'll re-enlarge the screen in just a moment, but for our mental health court. So actually, what's probably easier to better understand the mental health court. So this process, if you can still see my presentation here, is that referrals are actually made to the mental health court by attorneys, by judges, and by even potential defendants or participants of the court. And so then wherever they may be in the criminal justice process in Manhattan, they're referred to us, and then we see them for programming. So if we're looking at one of our two primary court parts, the emerging adult court that I mentioned, and this misdemeanor mental health court, focusing on the mental health statistics, at the end of March, we had 386 referrals over the course of about a year. This is again a newly launched part that began after COVID. So those are 386 referrals that were made from 100 Center Street to us at 314 54th Street. 54th Street. Of those 386 referrals, we were actually able to assess and start the intake process with 255 folks. And so that means that there are a lot of folks getting lost from 100 Center Street to 54th Street, just in the hustle of life and New York and all that can, start to sidetrack someone that is navigating serious mental illness. But out of those 255 folks, we have 218 folks that have successfully graduated the program. We had, at the time these stats were pulled, 30 cases that were ongoing, which meant that only 5 people warranted and were non-compliant, and only 9 people had their cases resolved downtown, which meant that this court wasn't maybe a good fit for them and was actually sent back to 100 Center Street. And so of the folks that get to Midtown, we're having tremendous success actually completing the court programming compared to more of the traditional court process.
All right. Eric,
sorry, I was just gonna say I can circle back with emerging adult and the arraignment stats for you too.
all right, sounds good. Okay.
Hey, Jordan, I was just curious, you had mentioned in the opening that your court was formed in 1993.
Yes, sir.
Can you just explain in a little more detail exactly how you're authorized? I'm just not clear if you're a program or a court in the traditional sense I think of it, that you go before like a judge in a hearing, because it sounds like there's a programmatic aspect to it. And I just wanted to understand in more detail what it means to be a court in this sense.
Yeah, so it's actually a little bit of both, which is great and allows us to respond in ways that are truly meaningful for the folks that we're working with. And so the Center for Justice Innovation is a nonprofit organization. That's an independent nonprofit organization. But essentially what this is a partnership with the Office of Court Administration, partnerships with the District Attorney's Office, and we all come together and essentially create and embody the Midtown Community Justice Center, or the Midtown Community Court within the Midtown Community Justice Center. And so we do have a judge that is OCA staff. So this is an appointed judge by the Office of Court Administration that sits in our court parts twice a week, Thursdays and Fridays. And essentially it is an acting court, just as you see court at 100 Center Street or uh, Kings County, Bronx, so on and so forth, in which we do see cases arraigned there. It's just the types of cases that are filtered to Midtown Community Justice Center, and then the alternative options and mandates that we have on the back end that separate us from your more traditional court. And so we are built out to really be uniquely responsive and offered really tailored programming options to the folks that we work with that are still going through a court process, just in a pretty innovative and non-traditional setting. And so we don't necessarily utilize some of the more punitive options that folks may have. We don't see live arrests in the sense that like folks aren't brought to us from holding cells in local precincts or from Rikers for arraignments. We are built in a way that allows us to really be thoughtful and person-centered with the way that we work with our clients, so that ultimately we aren't exacerbating some of the issues that they may bring to us when they report for court. And so while 100 Center Street, you could think of it as like the entire hub for Manhattan courts. They are the catch-all, so to speak. The system has really kind of recognized that folks that may identify as having mental health challenges, and folks certainly within the 18 to 25-year-old range, are better served by our court, being that we have social workers, case managers, and staff that are really trained to support these folks in a holistic way, and make speedy connections to additional social service providers, whether that be mental health, housing, substance use, public benefits, education, employment. And yeah, ultimately be able to keep our doors open and keep providing those kinds of services even after folks may have completed their obligation to the court. I hope that provides a bit more context.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I see Anne has a question.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a follow-up on that. I'd been thinking about this as what used to be known as a Quango, like a quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organization. So it's like, it's a nonprofit, but you're partnering with the government, and right? Is that a correct understanding? And
Yeah,
you're part of
so
the Brennan Center, right? Which is a whole nother thing.
the Brand Center?
The Brennan Center, are you not?
No,
Trying not.
no, no.
Oh, I
Our
thought
parent
I heard that at the
organization,
beginning.
our parent organization is the Center for Justice Innovation, formerly the
Okay.
Center for Court Innovation. But yes, we can't do any of this work without the partnership of some very key partners like the court, like you mentioned. The judge is our biggest stakeholder and cheerleader in that, he wants to make sure that the folks he sees before him in court are connected to opportunities that will ultimately lead them on pathways away from further criminal justice involvement. So it is truly a kind of partnership in every sense. And we work very closely with our elected officials as well. Everyone from Senator Horman Siegel to council members Brewer, Botcher, Powers, Rivera. Everyone is at the table, and NYPD as well, just because being in all of these spaces, having conversations with everyone at an open table can keep us truly aligned with some of the quality of life and public safety trends, whether that is folks that are entrenched in the system or the folks that, might be falling through the cracks that are still impacting our day-to-day lives.
Good.
So how long is your follow-up after people graduate from your program? And what do you know about recidivism for your graduates? And is there specific criteria by which people are referred to your program?
Yes. So and check me if I miss one of those questions along the way here. But so the first part, so we are not tracking folks after graduation. That really starts to venture along the lines of parole once you start kind of keeping folks in your net, so to speak. And we're talking about, again, really low level crimes. We're talking about shoplifting, we're talking about trespassing, we're talking about graffiti, possession of a controlled substance. And so these are all things that, once upon a time, if they were getting a jail sentence or fines, very, very short term, very light touch. In terms of programming, the proportionate response that has been built out here that the district attorney's office offers folks. So we're not controlling necessarily all of these offers, but the district, this is a partnership. It's really a one-time session, maybe 45 minutes to 2 hours for a diversion program. If we're talking about the alternative to incarceration, we're talking about maybe 1 to 5 sessions at Midtown Community Court. And then for our misdemeanor mental health work, it's actually a assessment that is based on a clinician's feedback after they meet with the client. And so since we're talking about so light touch, we really don't want to turn this into a supervised release or an over programming kind of concept where there are more chances for someone to actually maybe get in trouble or miss that mandate, just because studies show that, especially for low risk and low offenses, over programming leads to more justice system involvement than putting folks on that right track and just presenting them with the resources that they need.
Yeah, I get.
You had, sorry,
Yeah,
two
I
other
get
questions.
that, but how do you know what the efficacy is of your program if you're not following up?
So, I mean, in some cases, we can also like start to understand, are folks being rearrested? There are constant conversations that we're having across NYPD, across the defense agencies and whatnot. And so we do have a sense of are folks being arrested in some instances, but we really judge our efficacy by kind of two tracks. The first is, are folks actually completing the program that they gave us or that we offer them? So whether that's a diversion program or 5 sessions, are folks coming back to court? Are folks showing up for their court appearances? Are they completing the mandates that they have in between those court appearances? So the more folks that successfully complete or graduate programming definitely is a barometer for our success. On the other side, we operate in a harm reduction strategy as well. And so, especially I can use substance use, for instance. Abstinence as a solution is few and far between. But if you teach someone how to use safely, you start to really see improvements to not only their quality of life, but their impact on the community as well. And so harm reduction is actually a concept that we can apply to almost anything. And we certainly do in the criminal justice setting as well. And so if someone, I'll give you an actual example. We had a young person who just used to shoplift. That is what sometimes it was for their own sustenance, to feed themselves, to make money, things along those lines. Sometimes it was just, something to do if they were out and had nothing else to do. We had a young person show up in our courthouse in our justice center recently who, looked kind of exhausted, but shared, I just walked through Times Square and I looked at every single store over there, and 2 months ago, I would have stepped in and started taking things from this store, stealing things from this store. But I didn't. I came here because you told me even after graduation that I was welcome here. And so he wanted to meet with his social worker, kind of decompress a little bit and just unwind. And so we offered him food, we offered him drinks, we offered him a space that he could decompress, and he stayed in that space for just a second. And so really, especially as we're starting to think about what success looks like, I mean, we have to acknowledge that in many instances, young people or folks from our communities that have been generationally, often harmed or negatively impacted by the justice system and by some of its actors are now turning to a courthouse as a space of refuge and as a resource is a tremendous feat. And so our measures of success aren't necessarily purely quantitative, because sometimes success, especially for a lot of the folks and the challenges that they face, isn't always a straight line.
Just a follow-up question to that, and so I get the fact that you may not be doing the actual follow-up, once they complete the program and graduate, but before they graduate, do you offer referral services? Do you connect them to other organizations that might be kind of doing the more long-term programming that they might need?
Yes, extensively. So some of what you see on the screen now are the social services that we offer in-house. So it's quite a range of social services that are based on someone's needs. And so during that assessment, we're learning not only kind of, all right, what's the charge that brought you in here today, but we're also getting a sense of what are your needs. While we're doing this intake, folks are flagging, are you struggling from any maybe substance use or mental health challenges? Are you struggling with any other, maybe limited access to social services? Could that be you don't know where to get support on immigration, employment, education, housing? And we are great about staying in our own lane. So we are great at being connectors, but we do have short-term options for folks too. If it is longer term support that's needed, like you mentioned, we definitely have some of our core partners that we know are reliable, and we make warm handoffs in that scenario. And so it's not, here's a name and number, good luck getting to that space. It's, let's get on the phone with Rebecca from Breaking Ground. You said that you were actually on Breaking Ground's caseload recently. Let's talk through what were some of the issues there? What were some of the problems? Why wasn't that successful? Maybe then we can pivot to something that works for you. And so we try to give our clients a lot of agency in this process, because again, studies show that if someone not only perceives this whole process to be fair, they're more likely to comply with it. But if they're starting to choose what their next steps are, a lot of these referrals are much more sustainable and these outcomes are much more sustainable. Sorry, but not to belabor, but this is also true in situations for folks that aren't even court involved. And so I mentioned Community First, our street outreach program. We take a similar approach in that is not a housing first model. And so we all know that, some of these street outreach programs that make the rounds are able to immediately get someone into a shelter in Queens or a shelter in who knows where, even from some of our own neighborhoods. But what we've realized also in talking to some of these folks is that they have other competing priorities. And sometimes shelter and housing is not their first priority if they don't know where their next meal is coming from, if they have maybe untreated physical ailments, things along those lines. And so even in those scenarios, we're trying to understand, okay, what referrals can we make? What boxes can we check for you? So ultimately, when we do make those longer term referrals, it's much more successful and much more sustainable, because now we've eliminated some of those other barriers or priorities that were keeping you from fully committed.
Yeah. So your expansion from court to justice suggests that what you saw at the court made you think a lot of these cases wouldn't have been here in the first place if your clients received the right services in advance. Is that a fair assessment?
So we were operating some of these programs prior to our name change, which actually kind of fueled that. Like Project Reset, the program in diversion, we were operating since 2018. We had fatherhood programming that was really around from about 2016 to 2022 that didn't require justice system involvement either. And so the name change was kind of spurred not only from yes, to your point, recognizing that we don't have to wait till someone's in the courtroom to be effective here. If we can keep those low risk, low offense folks from ever joining us in court, they'll ultimately have better outcomes and are less likely to re-engage, than the person that is low risk, low offense, and gets the book thrown at them. So there are a couple factors that led to that name change. But yes, a part of that is around the notion that, you know, we do not need to necessarily wait until it's too late and the behavior already occurred to be effective in some of these spaces. And really, as a community justice center and before then as a community court, we recognize that we have to operate on both sides of this continuum, and we have to be present on the ground in communities to truly be responsive in an effective way to some of the issues that, yeah, our societies face.
Well, what I was getting at is obviously preventing something bad from happening is better than trying to fix it afterward. So what lessons should the city take from your program? You know, what is it the city not doing right now that it could do to preclude at least these low-level offenses?
Yeah, I mean, that is a loaded question. I think it kind of depends on maybe which space you're talking about. I know the Center for Justice Innovation also operates like violence interruption programs in neighborhoods in the South Bronx and in Crown Heights. And so those are utilizing peers with shared and lived experience, actually going out and interrupting gun violence in their neighborhoods, connecting with folks. Our community first community navigators also have shared and lived experience and are able to connect with folks that are battling substance use, mental health, and homelessness from a place of understanding. And so that allows us to build a rapport with folks. And so, yeah, I mean, just to stay there, as one thing that we're seeing catch up across the city is just kind of opening space for peers and for folks from our communities to step in and do this work. Because, you know, at the end of the day, while our practitioners are experts in one way, some of the folks that have lived these lives are truly the experts in these spaces. And it's also encouraging to see some of these programs, whether it is the district attorney's office choosing to keep as many cases as possible undocketed and divert them from programming or intensive programming and decline to prosecute their cases, really keeps so many folks from having that, you know, that label of being a criminal or something along those lines that can lead to like self-fulfilling prophecies and whatnot. So yeah, I think there are a lot of lessons that can be learned, and a lot of lessons we continue to learn from our partners and other experts around the country doing this work. But yeah, I think we're continuing to push that envelope daily.
Maybe just to ask, reframe Stu's question a little bit differently, but I think trying to get what he was trying to get at was, I guess one question for us is, do you have the resources that you need to meet the need in the city? Or could you do more with more resources? And the other question is, are you just simply maxed out because you can't find enough eligible, let's say, that people that meet your eligibility criteria, such that, you know, scaling up and, you know, getting more funding for your programming maybe wouldn't solve the problem, because the rate limiting part is, you know, how many people qualify for these types of programs and what kind of programming is appropriate for them, right? So my question is, as we think about the scope of the problem and how maybe we can help advocate for those solutions, you know, do you feel that with more resources you would be able to do more?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have I'm going to actually answer that in phases, but yes, absolutely. So one, we are, like I mentioned, from the court side of things, trying to reclaim our catchment area. And so right now we're only operating Thursdays and Fridays as a court, even though the Justice Center is open Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And so as we reclaim some of our catchment area cases, we'll actually be able to expand another court calendar. And so that's fantastic. And so we want to eventually be open 5 days a week and have you know, as many cases coming through our court as possible. But there are actually a limit on resources that we're seeing from some of our partners in these spaces too. And so on our end, you know, another social worker, another case manager, another intake specialist, of course, that's helpful, especially if we're talking about adding a third court day with another 80 people that are supposed to show up to court. But if we look at the court officers, there's been a shortage of court officers recently. There's been a shortage of judge. So our judge actually stands on other court parts Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday when he's not at Midtown. Additionally, there are a shortage of clerks in the court system as well. And the defense agencies are having trouble recruiting as well. So when we're talking about, you know, standing on a case that may be at Midtown Community Court, sometimes we see defense attorneys rushing up from 100 Center Street to actually cover arraignments downtown and then get to their case at Midtown as well. So there are resource issues around us that, you know, we have a little bit of a limited ability to address. Can we do more with more resources though? Absolutely, especially within Midtown as well. And so if we talk about like the Community First program, we actually, that program is 2 navigators. And so those are 2 folks covering all the way from 40th to 53rd, 6th, 7th, and 8th, plus Restaurant Row. If you walk through Times Square, you know, that it takes a lot of us, just a lot of time, even if we're on our own moving through that, let alone trying to stop and connect with everyone that might be experiencing homelessness. So more folks on that front would allow us to not only venture into Hell's Kitchen and some of these other spaces that we're locally around, but would increase our ability to also support those folks that have co-occurring challenges, many of which are coming through our courts as well. And we are, you know, scouring everything for more resources. Some of our funding comes from city agencies, some of them come from elected officials, some of them come from private grants. And so in a true nonprofit sense, we are flipping over as many rocks as we can to not only kind of bolster some of our services, but also continuing to expand them so that we can maintain a level of responsivity that is truly effective.
Sure. What's your relationship with the police precincts? What goes on?
Yeah, so we have so our strongest relationships are with the 6 precincts that I mentioned. Pulling those back up for you. Everything here but the 19th. So we don't work with we don't get referrals from the Upper East Side. But we do work closely with the other 6 precincts here. Midtown North is literally next door to our courthouse. And so we meet with their commanding officer, Inspector Galt, very frequently. Midtown South, we have a great relationship with Commander Edwards. And we are often, I mean, just earlier this week, I was at the Midtown North Community Precinct Council meeting. And so we are constantly engaging NYPD, trying to get a sense of, okay, what are the crime trends that you're seeing? What are the public safety trends that you're seeing? Let's take this a step further. Is perception truly our reality? Because we often hear, you know, what we see in the news, but what are we seeing at their level too? And so we're able to hear things like, you know, crime is down and arrests are up. And so that's able to give us a bit more insight on maybe different policing strategies that they're engaging, different trends that they're seeing, so we know who's actually coming to our court. And so it is a symbiotic relationship. In some instances, you know, we try to build each other up as well. And so Project Reset, the pre-arraignment diversion program for one, that program in its truest sense is keeping folks from going to court. But to do that, we need to actually be able to contact the folks that are referred to us. And to be able to contact those folks, they need to give NYPD correct contact information. That is not always how this plays out. And so there are conversations that we have with NYPD around like, okay, what's your messaging? Are you telling folks around Project Reset? Or maybe the contact rates are down because we're seeing more folks that are homeless and don't actually have, or sorry, unhoused and don't actually have maybe a cell phone or an email address or a physical address where they could get a letter telling them about our programming or an email or anything along those lines. So yeah, we are definitely always connected to NYPD and are at as many meetings as we can, just trying to make sure that we're hearing some updates directly from the source.
Any other questions? I don't know if you had more material you wanted to cover. I know we kind of took questions and after the first part.
Yeah, so the only I'll show two more topics. One, obviously there are folks that, you know, fall outside of maybe the traditional court process or the alternative to incarceration process. And so one thing that is very new this year is the district attorney's effort to expand eligibility in Project Reset. And so this means that there were folks that previously were probably just going to some of the more traditional options through 100 Center Street, but they were very commonly seen at 100 Center Street because some of those traditional options may not have been working. And so the district attorney's office actually, again, in an effort to keep as many folks from the system from more punitive consequences that often exacerbated issues, started screening folks individually. And so now we have individual assessments based on someone's criminal justice history and arrest records to determine are they eligible for programming. We're seeing a lot of these types of charges that you see here, but it is not necessarily an automated system. We have actual people looking at actual people's files, understanding, okay, is this someone that could benefit from services? If they don't end up actually engaging with us through that pre-arraignment diversion program, so we're now actually operating not only at our own court and doing virtual programming outside the court, but we're also in 100 Center Street too, offering some of the same programming for the folks that are eligible for us. So we have a lot of different stopgaps in place now as well, trying to keep folks from falling through the cracks. The only other thing that I would like to mention, and I'll stop sharing my screen, is that we can be a bit of you know, a Swiss Army knife for the community. And so I think the best example of that recently is that we're in community precinct meetings, we're in community board meetings, things along those lines, and we're hearing about the electronic bikes, the electronic vehicles, and the micro mobility hazards that really we all face in the day to day. And we also recognize that, you know, similar to a lot of scenarios, we're seeing a lot of people having these conversations, but in a lot of different circles. And so Midtown thought, and when we came together with our judge and thought, how can we start to bring all of these folks back together into one room, bring all these experts and start to present some local solutions? So we actually at New World Stages hosted an e-bike or a micro-mobility symposium and invited NYPD's Transportation Bureau, the Department of Transportation, some 8 or 9 elected officials, deliveristas, so representation from the actual delivery companies, you name it, and had all these folks around the table and talked about rider safety, talked about urban planning, talked about safe battery charging, things along those lines, with the effort of, you know, collecting all this feedback, having all this expertise to then be able to, you know, figure out what outcomes can make a difference. And so we're discussing now on the back end, should this look like maybe proposed legislation? Should this be an op-ed or a white paper? But something tangible so that next steps start to feel, you know, productive as opposed to some of these more cyclical conversations. And so we're looking at potentially doing the same around shoplifting as well, and things along those lines to keep the conversations moving forward and keep momentum high.
All right,
One more question, since you mentioned several times Project Reset. I was reading last year, the mayor's office put out a report on retail theft and said that there was supposed to be a specialized track of Project Reset called Second Chance, and that initiative was supposed to be for petite larceny, grand larceny in the fourth degree. I'm curious, does that program, I don't know if it's still called that, does it exist? Was it an expansion of Project Reset? How is that program doing?
So the center is the citywide provider for Project Reset, but Project Reset looks a little bit different in every borough. So I'm not sure if second track you called it.
Chance, I think is what it was called in the mayor's report last year about combating retail theft, was supposed to be a specialized track within Project Reset for retail theft and that type of look.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm not sure if Second Chance is operated in another borough. In Manhattan, we do not have Second Chance. There are, though, again, so there's an individualized assessment even for Project Reset. So even if we're only seeing someone for an hour, we're still doing a full intake with that person. And we do see the charges that folks come in through or come in with. And so really, I mean, we're fortunate as a community court and community justice center and kind of this entity that operates with so much collaboration, but a little bit outside of the centralized courts, in that we can develop our own specialized programming in response to this, propose it to the district attorney's office, and then implement it. And so we have had programming that focuses a little bit more on shoplifting. We have really skilled facilitators that, okay, they recognize that 6 out of the 10 people here are actually here for shoplifting. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's hone in on that and really get to the root of, what's causing some of these issues. And then we, again, offer social services to everyone, not only at the point of intake, but afterwards as well. And so a lot of the folks that we see that are shoplifting are doing so because they don't have any other alternatives. And so after group is over, we're pulling folks aside and saying like, oh, you know what? I heard you were shoplifting because you didn't know where your next meal was coming from. We actually have a benefits enrollment counselor on site right there in that office. How about you take a moment, see if you might be able to enroll in food stamps or something along those lines. Looking at trying to do the same thing because we're seeing a lot of forged instrument charges lately. So that is like the fake license plates, the fake licenses, registrations, often associated with the micromobility. And so like we've been offering know your rights classes and whatnot. So folks know that, just because someone says that this paper is real, might not be. And you really should look towards the city agencies for your registration and some of those things. So we do offer tailored programming, but Second Chance is not one that I'm familiar with. And the timing of that is a little interesting just because the funder for Project Reset did switch last year. And so we were awarded a citywide contract July 1st. And the funder switched from the district attorney's office to the mayor's office of criminal justice. And so, yeah, I'm not 100% as to what program that might be, but across the city, yes, Project Reset looks different depending on the populations we're working with. So in the Bronx, they do a lot of restorative justice work and community-based circles. In Staten Island, it's actually 2 sessions for Project Reset. And so, yeah, we can really be unique and tailored to all of our spaces.
All right, Anne, you have a question?
Yeah, I think this all sounds super interesting. I now want to see your presentation more than ever, if only for my own like information. But I have to say, I just was, sort of multitasking here and looked at the Justice Innovation website. And something that, as somebody who has worked in the nonprofit space before, I noticed is a really glaring error is that there are no financials on the website. And I'm sure that is way above your pay grade, but if you can like, put it up there, that, personally as a potential donor, I never give to anybody if I can't see their financials. So But this the programs I've heard about some of these programs, but didn't put it all together. Especially the gun diversion programs is something I heard quite a bit about, and it's thank you very much for coming. And I don't know how you found your way here, if it was Matt, our board office, or you reaching out, but thanks very much.
No, it's my pleasure, and I definitely hear you on the funding component on the website. There is so the Center for Justice Innovation is kind of the central headquarters for over 900 employees, not only throughout New York City, but Jersey. We operate in Los Angeles. We have a sister project in London too. And so we
Wow.
do have a small communications team that helps man this website. But I'm close with them, and I will flag that for them next time we speak.
Yeah, just put up the 990, like it's like your it's like what you give to the IRS.
All right, anything else for Jordan?
I guess actually, I mean, what I want to see come out of this is are reports that tell us what should be done. We know sort of what you're doing. We don't know if if it can be expanded to other programs. We don't really know the efficacy. And that's kind of what we need to know. I don't want to just take on stage that it sounds great, and you have some indications of success. I want to know that, you've actually had success. And we can project this onto other programs.
So on the center's website, innovatingjustice.com, .org, there are certainly publications on there from our technical assistance teams and whatnot that speak to the efficacy of some of these programs, that definitely make suggestions in terms of best practices as it relates to how we should be conducting assessments for some of the folks that we're working with, how to offer proportionate alternatives to incarceration or traditional forms of consequence. There's even a report recently released that looks at young people that carry guns and really try to understand, okay, why do people carry? Is it for safety? Is it for violence? Is it for protection? Things along those lines. So there's also a podcast on there actually too. So there's definitely a few different media options to engage in content similar to your ask, bringing it closer to home. So I am actually working with Midtown to lead a community needs assessment as well. And so this will be a large, basically surveying effort in which we're talking to not only folks that are justice involved, but community members that may not be justice involved, stakeholders across both the criminal justice and social service spaces, to try to get a better sense of, okay, what are the needs that we're hearing from the community, so that we can better align our services and supports too. So we're also trying to figure out, okay, what needs to be done in our spaces, because of course we can be responsive to the trends that we see in the system, but we're a community court and community justice center, so definitely branching that out more broadly too.
Thank you.
All right. So thanks, Jordan. I think this is a good first conversation. I think there's obviously a lot more that we want to hear about in the coming months. It's just how effective are things, and what can be done next, as we talked about. So appreciate you jumping on with us, and sure we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure talking with you all. And please use this as a resource. I know that our project director and our judge were booked tonight, but they also love coming to these meetings. And so definitely reach out if folks want to come and see the Misdemeanor Mental Health Court in action. We often host site visits. Folks can not only come and hear from some of our staff that are doing the direct service work, but then be able to see the work in action too. So yeah, please, again, just use this as a resource, and would look forward to continuing the conversation and joining back in this space too.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe we can set up a site visit for the community.
Yeah, please do. I can help set that up so folks can reach out to me directly and we'll figure out a Thursday or Friday that works for folks.
Sure. All right. We'll be in touch. All right. Thanks,
Sounds
Jordan.
great. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Jordan.
So, all right. So a lot to unpack there. A lot of data that's not necessarily being gathered. But you know, I think there's some good things happening there. It's just a question of, you know, how effective is it? And what I couldn't really gauge from the conversation is, you know, what percentage of the cases are they taking and what percentage could they actually take? Realistically speaking. So I think 100 Center Street is obviously overloaded. And obviously the courts, you know, as we heard from the district attorney's office a couple of months ago, you know, not everything can see the light of day there. So you know, the courts just, I think there's a lot of resource issues overall from what I'm seeing. Not necessarily funding issues, but more, you know, staffing issues where there's just not enough people that want to do those jobs. That's holding up the system. So, any other thoughts on what we heard on and directionally where we want to go with this?
I mean, I would say definitely there are multiple bottlenecks in the system, right? So it's not just about giving, let's say, this particular organization more resources, but I think to speak more broadly about just funneling resources into these kinds of prevention programs is kind of where we might be able to take a stand. On the evaluation piece, I will say this, full disclosure, I used to work for an alternative to incarceration service provider 15 years ago. But I remember, so a lot of, you know, they're valid questions about efficacy, but there just isn't funding to do the kind of massive amount of follow-up that would require, the massive amount of money that would require, and these, we're talking low-level offenses. You're never gonna get the kind of funding you would need to like do long-term longitudinal studies and follow-up of these kind of, it just doesn't make sense. And when you go and look at, there is a mountain of evidence about these kinds of programs in terms of the cost benefit and also the effectiveness of these kinds of soft, you know, core skill programming, referral, all of that thing. There's all of those, like, you can't necessarily evaluate this particular program, but you can look at an evaluation of these types of programs and how they work. And I think that there is a lot of evidence out there, so that just to.
Yeah, I thought his point about them being a connector was really interesting and valuable. And I also thought I felt like they have some kind of sense because they are connectors with what's coming up and what are the issues that are getting more having more salience, whether it's because there's more activity in that area, or whether it's because there's just like more concern about that area. So I think I'd love to, you know, have them come in every so often and just like get a sense of what do they see that's coming on. And again, you know, they may not have all the numbers. And I thought his point about, you know, if you're tracking people too closely, it's gonna put them off. It's gonna make the program less effective. And I think that's a fair point just from a psychological perspective.
Any other comments? Yeah, I mean, I would just say as far as measuring the effectiveness, I mean, really, if you just take court records, and look and see, have they been in the system ever since, whether it's in Manhattan, the 5 boroughs, New York State, New Jersey, other parts of the other states. I mean, that's really all you need is, you know, if this is their last interaction with the criminal justice system, then I'd say that's a success. If there are other issues that are still going on, then it's
That
not.
sounds like a great project for a grad student.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we have any interns or anybody, but yeah, I mean, that's, you know, somebody that wants to take that on. I mean, it would be a lot of public records and whatnot, but the information should generally be out there. At least to some degree, and I think that would kind of give us either a leg to stand on, or
Really, these records are public for petite larceny for underage? I mean, I think that's like I hope those records.
I don't know that they're public, but they're available. I mean, you'd have to request, and it would, the person that's researching is strictly looking at numbers, not necessarily names. So I mean, the information should be there. So meaning that they wouldn't actually have to have resources, that would, go and create the data. It's out there. It's in databases. We don't necessarily have access to it, but somebody does. And it could be granted under certain circumstances, I'm sure. But yeah, I would love to see a study on that. And, maybe there's a journalist out there that wants to, do a story on it and do an investigative piece. And I think that would go a long way, to determining, what level of funding they should see here. And, this is just Midtown. We have Uptown, we have Downtown, we have 4 other boroughs, in the city. So, there's obviously some opportunity for this model to take place if, elsewhere, if it's effective. So, anything else, before we move to budget requests?
I just want to apologize. I have to step out.
Okay.
In a minute.
All right, so let's go to discussion of Public Safety Committee budget requests. Steve, do you know what the timeline is for finalizing everything with the budget committee? That takes
This
place
is
over
for
the summer.
next year, so, but the
Yeah.
problem is we have the gap in the summer, so.
Right, and the budget. goes
Yeah,
into
so
effect.
basically just like try to get through, we don't have that many requests, so I would say like.
Yeah.
Before we break for the summer, at least have them moving along. We still have another month, when we come back
Mhm.
before it has to be submitted, so.
Okay,
It's just like, we don't wanna wait until like that last 1 month.
Yeah.
before-
And how did we get these requests? I mean, there are ones that have been existing for the last couple of years and they're just on the spreadsheet and then we could add more to it. So it's not coming from anyone, it's coming from the community board.
Yeah.
Yes.
These are-
These are our own.
These are from us.
Yes, got it.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, I mean, based on
Yes,
community
yeah,
feedback.
yes.
In fact, I had trouble putting stuff into budget request.
Brendan?
But I will say, there's not that much more room to add. The city limits us to 40 capital requests, and that includes continued support. And we're at 37, like when you add in capital requests and continued support.
But we can
And-
swap things, oh, sorry.
Yeah, and we can't have any more than 25 expense requests, and we're
Mhm.
currently at 21, so
Okay.
those are things to be mindful of.
Our expenses are at 21 of 20,
21 and 25,
21 and 20.
so
And is there a limit on capital?
the limit is 40.
40, okay.
And we're at 37, they're like 29 capital, 8 continued support. Continued support is in the same, like it counts toward capital.
Okay. All right, did we get responses on some of these from last year?
Yes,
I know we've seen these and I know we've talked about them, I feel like year over year, and
yes, so for anyone looking at the error table, always draw your attention to the current year response.
Mhm.
That's where you'll see what agencies have told us.
But I mean, we've done this like every year. We say, I mean, Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, like how much more specific location do they
So
need?
I think
Right?
what they're getting at there is within Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, there's like the garden in the back, there's certain, so I mean, that's something that they could offline with the precinct commander, and I could certainly touch base with capital
Yeah.
plan.
And of course, I mean, Dag Hammarskjöld, like half of it's kind of cut off because of the building construction.
But it's
So,
just saying here, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, is that the funding has to come from someone else anyway. Someone has to fund it first and then they want to know where to put it.
right.
So
Right,
that's
and
why I read that,
that's-
yeah.
But I
Yeah,
mean,
but-
this
So
does
someone's
have,
funding.
like, Keith Powers did sign on to this, right?
Yeah.
He-
Yeah,
Funded.
I don't remember exactly which fiscal year he pledged, but yeah, I mean, it's.
Okay, so the money is,
I mean, as far as I know, it's, you know, there were at least verbal agreements.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's.
so
in
then
the
this
budget.
wouldn't be for next, we wouldn't put this in for next year, it's already been funded, we're just tracking this then.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, you know, every budget committee takes a slightly different stance on this over the years, but yeah, I mean, if it's, so I mean, basically what this is saying is. It's up to the elected officials to use, you know, from their allocations.
Right.
So I mean, from that standpoint, until they're actually implemented, I don't, I mean, if we're limited and, you know, it can be, maybe it can be, you know, security cameras can be one line. And then, you know, these are the locations within that. It's not just, I mean, I think there's other issues district-wide besides Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza. That's obviously front and center because it's a big plaza right next to the United Nations. There's a lot of protests and a lot of quality of life issues over the years. I will say that the women's homeless shelter is obviously temporarily closed for the expansion program that's taking place. So that has cut down a little bit. I see. Eric.
Matt, have you been hearing, I feel like I'm hearing less about problems at Dag Hammarskjöld in like it just sort of over the last year than I did previously. Not, which is not to say that I'm not saying that this request should go away. I'm just reality checking because I feel like I am hearing less.
Well, you're, like I'm saying, you're probably hearing less because the shelter around the corner is not
Yeah.
there.
On the other hand, there's also now a shelter at the Vanderbilt Y.
Yeah, I mean, that's been there for a couple of years.
Yeah. That
we have-
started during COVID.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some quality of life issues there. You know, I mean, for the most part, precinct foot patrols have solved the issues, at least at the time. So I mean, there is more of a police presence there. There's also a lot of protests that take place, so there's also police
Oh my
presence.
God.
You know, I think that might be the other factor. Since October, there've been, you know, countless demonstrations, whether it's there or at the Israeli consulate or, you know, somewhere in between.
Right.
So
Same
there's just-
neighborhood.
yeah, there's just a lot more police activity going on that might deter, you know, some of the quality of life issues. And also the building work that's going on right next door has kind of cut down on the functionality of the plaza.
Yeah.
So that being said, I mean, I'll leave it to you guys. If it were me, I would just say security cameras would be one request from the Public Safety Committee, and within that, these would be the locations that we would prioritize. Since it's more of an allocation within the elected officials, you're gonna get the same response next year.
Wait, but I don't quite understand something here, because it says it's up to the NYPD and the local precinct commander to
Mhm.
decide where those cameras are placed. Have we asked the local precinct commander to place those cameras in Damershul?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the
Plaza.
precinct, it was, I mean, Inspector Edwards was the commander at the time, that we were working on it, and yeah, I mean, they have no issue. I think what they're getting at is the specific placement. But I mean, we can say Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, but the precinct commander would have to say, because they'll have visibility to where all the other cameras are and where, you know, there might be some other private cameras in as well. So that's where they would have total visibility to where all the cameras are. So I think that's why they're putting that stipulation in here. Is because we can kind of gauge, there's some public knowledge as to where cameras are, but you know, I don't know that even at a community board level, we want to necessarily disclose all of that.
Right.
So
And I feel like the police are gonna know better than we do, kind of like what the best place, you know, within a certain area. Like if we say Dag Hammarskjöld, they're gonna know where the problem spots are and where the other cameras are.
right.
But they're not talking about where to put the cameras.
No, funded.
They're saying, we're asking for cameras in Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza. And they're
Right.
saying, well, we may not it may be up to the NYPD to put those cameras in a different part of the city, not in down dog commercial.
Is that how that should be
No,
read?
Right,
No, it
That's
says,
not how I read that.
but
No,
this, it's a response from the city.
no, once they get funded to the
Yeah, I mean,
Technology Bureau.
Yeah, it looks like the elected officials allocate based on, they're given a budget number and then they allocate accordingly. And then from there, it looks, what I'm taking that to believe is the precincts will then, iron out the details as to like specific locations, because within DAG, it's, a whole block long from First to Second Avenue. So there's a lot of, I don't know how many cameras they need. I will also say that they have the mobile unit that sits on First Avenue that has a lot of cameras that they could probably just move over to 47th Street, which would serve, also provide some additional camera angles, if needed. But yeah, I feel like as a committee that's looking at this district wide, it just doesn't feel like, it feels like we're trying to micromanage something that we shouldn't be micromanaging.
I think at the very net of it is, it's a capital request.
Yeah.
If there's no funding, additional funding to fund for this, and we don't even know what the price tag is, because it could be equipment,
Right.
it could be additional persons to manage that equipment. It's
Yeah.
just more, we need they just,
Right.
it needs the funding, so we don't even have a proposal.
Yeah.
We
And
don't even have like tangible, like, this is the camera model that we discussed with you guys, and we haven't had that dialogue with NYPD. What would you recommend? What model? How many more people? Like, at the end of it, if it was like a bill of materials with costs and a person, then that's something that we could communicate to elected officials, to whomever that can help with the fund. We don't have that first step. I think they're kind of hinting like, for us to go 90 and they'll just 10, because we don't even have, we
Yeah.
haven't had that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know numbers and.
We don't know
and
numbers.
The actual allocation.
It could be one camera, it could be 15 cameras, it could be 2 additional personnel, it could be, it's not plug-in ready, you might need that mobile unit that you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, or you might need electrical
You
upgrades.
might need
or some
electrical,
other-
right,
some
there
other
might be no
infrastructure.
electrical.
But yeah, I hear you.
Well, my other confusion about this is, I mean, this is our budget request for the city, so are they
Right.
telling us? This doesn't belong in our budget request, it belongs in a different, it's a special
Yeah,
allocation handled by the electeds that go through NYPD. So the city doesn't have anything to do with the security cameras, we shouldn't be asking the city for this, we should be
Yeah.
asking through a different channel, which is this other.
Yeah,
Mechanism.
it's a little confusing because we also have the district needs statement, which generally is like a checklist of what the district is asking for. But yeah, I mean, I hear you. And this,
Because the city agency here is what? Who are we?
NYPD.
It's NYPD, okay.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I wish there would be more consistency throughout the committees on this, but it seems like it's up to each committee chair. But, from my standpoint, yes, we do think security cameras are important. Now, didn't Bellevue South just get an upgrade? They didn't have cameras in.
I forget right off the top of my head, honestly.
Because I mean, the other location that high priority now is the new Esplanade, which has no cameras to this point. So that might be another opportunity. So if we're talking specific locations, that might be something that's something the community is asking for, Brendan.
Now, if it is indeed true that there were camera upgrades or cameras installed at Bellevue South Park, that's another one of our budget requests, just
Yeah,
FYI, so.
Yeah, and they just unveiled all of those upgrades last year, so I mean.
right.
Thought that cameras, I mean, really what should come out of this is whenever there's an infrastructure upgrade or a capital project, cameras should be standard. Like we just built the Esplanade, but we didn't budget for cameras. And that's a situation where people can jump right into the East River, let alone other quality of life and criminal behavior. So I feel like, I mean, maybe there's some legislation that needs to be passed that would, require security cameras come standard with, most capital projects.
But
Or-
you know, Matt, that I think is another argument for your idea for just like making it one item for security
Yes.
cameras.
Yeah.
And even include in that, in the language for that, that it should be security cameras should be included in, you know, the budgeting for infrastructure improvements.
Mhm.
But remember, so the way that these requests work is they need to be very specific. They can't be, we're not issuing guidelines to the city. This is a
Mhm.
very specific request, so they need to be. They need to be easily understandable from whoever from the city is getting this request. Like
Mhm.
what the response is and how they can fit it into their budget, right? So.
So
It's-
maybe the language is something like, you know, with particular, you know, we increased security cameras with particular concern at, you know, Dog Hammarskjöld, Bellevue South. And, you know, then I don't know what the sort of vague language is about, you know, other locations of high concern. Like I mean, again, I'm just making that up, but where we're kind of where we hear there are problems. Because that's why we requested these two locations previously.
So taking a step back off of and your comment,
Mhm.
I'm gonna pick on the NYPD. They have an idea of like a heat map of conflict areas,
Mhm.
conflict corridors. If we had that paired with like you said, legislatively, in places of high impact, high whatever, based on this data, heat maps of high, whatever, uh, security solutions like a camera should be considered within, um, part of a capital, like, say, what was the one that they did at South Bellevue, a renewal project or renovation project?
Yeah, I mean, it was
It
a
should
big.
be included as a consideration in part of the capital, of the part of the renovation project.
Mhm.
And I think if we put that as like, say, legislation, because it's paired with actual data from the NYPD or like agencies, with addressing a security concern for it, like adding security solutions, not necessarily cameras, because it'd be at the recommendation of whoever provided that data. I think legislation like that leads towards that will be more, I guess, more impactful at a wider space, because this individual, we thought this was pretty specific, but it's
So
not.
maybe, but that's, I think, a legislation request, like that's a resolution, not a budget request.
Right, that's fair, that's fair.
Right, and
And I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I think that's a great idea, but it's like, it's just not this.
Right.
yeah, that's not part of this conversation, but I mean, it can certainly be an agenda item down the road. But I think we just need to dot our i's and dot our t's there and make sure that, cross our t's and make sure that we, you know, understand the full impact of, you know, where, you know, basically how many cameras roughly would be needed. And, you know, I don't really know in terms of, you know, what the costs are and what the, and, you know, what the overall allocations look like within the budget. You know, some of them, because the way the city works, I mean, they could, you know, you could tap into the parks budget for certain cameras in parks. You could be looking at, you know, private cameras for some areas, like not that border, you know, high profile buildings. So there's a lot of moving parts there, but I would say, you know, I mean, I think the process really is that the precinct commanders work with the elected officials to secure those. And that's really how they get, or the precinct commanders roll it up through NYPD, and NYPD, you know, does it at a higher level.
Does it make sense to have a pointed conversation with NYPD's, what do they call it, crime prevention? Or whatever related department that can, because this is a request that came from the community.
Mhm.
Maybe we need to have that conversation with NYPD. Because they could be like, oh, you guys don't need cameras, you need blah.
Right, and yeah, I mean, I think, and I mean, the Bellevue South one has been on there for as long as I can remember. I think I was in on the Housing Homeless Committee. back when, there were, there was a lot of drug activity over there, and that's really what led to the cameras was, where people just were seeing needles all over the place when they were walking their dog or whatever in Bellevue South. And I mean, I think it's got, I haven't heard that many complaints. I don't know, Brendan, if you've been hearing, any district service problems in the past year, but I mean, I feel like 2016, 2017, it peaked.
Not so much at Bellevue South, but, I don't know if our electeds have gotten complaints there. I know before the renovation, it was a source of some major quality of life issues.
Definitely. Since the renovation, I think there's,
Done wonders.
yeah,
But so going off of Stephen's suggestion, I really do think we should have a dialogue conversation with the precinct commanders at NYPD, because they're the ones who know what they
Yeah.
need, and then we can say, help us put together the budget request that, or they can say, oh, why are you asking for this?
Right,
We
right.
already do this with our elected
They could be
allocations, in which
limited on
case,
resources.
in which case we can take it off, because
Right.
they're already,
Right.
they're doing it.
yeah, I
separately,
mean,
but-
you could, I mean, it might not be a bad idea for this committee to touch base with the precincts, about a month or so before we go through this process, because the commanders will change every couple of years, for one, and two, a lot of times, some commanders know exactly where all the cameras are, within their precincts. Others, would have to look up to see, exactly where they are. So I think it really depends on the crime trends, and it depends on, what infrastructure is being built. It could also, there could be, some temporary issues such as scaffolding or stuff like that, that makes, that causes some crime, but, a lot of times that's private property anyway, so, we wouldn't be asking the city to do anything there, so, yeah, I mean, I think that would be the, process that I would recommend, is just touch base with the commanders. I mean, I can certainly get that information, over the next couple of weeks, and see what as far as the air table and the process, I'm not sure what works best for the committee. But, to me, cameras are one bucket, and they're, hopefully over time, the need goes down. But, they can be priority locations, and then they can be addressed in order of priority. But I don't think this committee and the board and the public won't necessarily have all the, information, nor should they, that would be necessary to determine exactly where these cameras should go.
And the need may go down if only because there are just cameras everywhere.
Right, and with new construction, new private construction, that's certainly something that they should be doing on their own. So I mean, for instance, when a crime occurs, the detectives will often, see what cameras are in the area, and they'll go and they'll request video, for something like that. So, I think the need should go down over time. Plus, everybody has a cell phone now, so whenever something happens, people, start filming it, and, some people post it on the Citizen app or Nextdoor.com or whatever other outlets are, out there. So,
I think talking to NYPD makes sense, because like I said, the renovation at South, Bellevue South
mhm,
helped a lot, and that was without a camera. It trimmed some trees, they cleared everything up, it's no longer. So who
Yeah.
knows, an officer that covers that area, or
mhm.
departmental head, may know, like, oh, what you guys need is a new light bulb. Or
Yeah, sometimes
something.
lighting, lighting can also be, something that enhances the public safety. Especially with scaffolding in some of the dark areas, but I think, the renovations there might have done the trick.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's not, and I would also, say, talk to the Parks Department too, for public spaces, because, they have budget for some things. It seems like cameras come from NYPD, but, technically, if NYPD doesn't have the money, you could also argue that it's, the parks, it's in the interest of the Parks Department to, spend their money on those things too. But, and Parks Enforcement, you might want to talk to as well, because they also, patrol the parks alongside NYPD. So, are we good with, tightening that up, or do we just wanna leave it until we have a better? I don't know.
I mean, for now, we could probably collapse them into one
Mhm.
request, but pending whatever discussions you
Yeah.
have with NYPD, we can change how it's worded later.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the less you ask for, the more meaningful it becomes with government. That if you ask them for 30 things, then it, each one tends to get diluted. So if you're asking for security cameras in key locations, that might, free up some space for something else that, is also very important.
Yeah, that works for me too.
For item number 3, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't foresee any, contact the agency.
Yeah, we had trouble getting a response back from DHS, right?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, with the migrant crisis, I know there's been a lot of personnel changes, a lot of resignations, a lot of things happening over there. So I mean, I think with the migrant element to it, I mean, I think it's just as important, if not more important than it was a year ago. I mean, a year ago, it was the women's shelter that's now being expanded, which is closed temporarily. That triggered this, but I think, the 30th Street shelter is still the intake center for here and takes in all the migrants, and they're the only facility that has DHS police, and there's still problems there, but not as many.
Wait, I thought it was the Roosevelt Hotel was the intake center.
No, that's specifically for asylum seekers. I'm
Oh.
talking for people entering the shelter system.
Excuse me, sorry, thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, there probably is some overlap there that some of them, if it's one thing if they're getting, if they're seeking a temporary asylum shelter, but if they're entering the shelter system, meaning that they will need shelter until they have some sort of housing, then that's really where 30th Street comes into play for single men. Women and families go to different centers, but
Where are these cameras being placed within the shelters?
no, this is regarding the DHS.
This is a person. Right?
DHS, I mean, to that question, I mean, we
Oh, it's an expense.
at different community advisory board meetings over the years, they've said that they've increased the number of cameras in response to some of the crimes that have occurred, including the homicide that occurred years back.
Right.
But they haven't elaborated specifically within the facility. So, but the main thing here is DHS, the city's DHS unit covers the 30th Street facility, so I'm not as concerned there. They have arrest capabilities, and they're on site 24/7, which is what we used to have at the women's shelter on 46th Street. But now it's, before they shifted to, during the pandemic, when they shifted to private security, then that shifted the burden to the precinct. And they can't respond to incidents there. They can't be there 24/7. So someone calls 911 for a dispute, that's a problem. So that was what led to this conversation. But I still think, I mean, we could probably tweak the language a little bit here, but I think, there should be some sort of expectations of, within the private security. So if private security is being used, then, our first choice is DHS police. Obviously, there's funding issues and recruiting issues, there, because I don't think they have that many, members of the, force anymore. But
What is DHS?
it's, the DHS police they're like peace officers now, where they're not.
What does DHS mean?
Department of
Homeless
Homeless
Services.
Services.
Homeless services.
Yeah, So it was.
So they report to
it-
DHS, they don't report to the NYPD.
Correct.
Yeah.
And they can make arrests and, you know, spare, I mean, if something major happens, NYPD will still be there, but, you know, for a lot of the routine disputes that take place inside the facility, they can address that. And
The big thing was that they had arrest capability, which like right there at the facility, and that you can't beat that versus NYPD US. Somewhere.
Yeah. So,
So we're asking for the budget to be restored to what it used to be, is that?
yeah, and maybe, and we can acknowledge that the women's shelter is being renovated. I don't remember the exact timeline for when they're reopening. It's what, a couple of years from now or something?
Yeah.
But
27?
That's right, because it's basically a reconstruction of the entire building.
yeah,
Big project.
but I mean, that should
mean,
be,
Yeah,
because this is for what, fiscal 26 that we're looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that might be close to the time frame. It might be fiscal 27, they actually reopen, but it should definitely be on radar for, you know, when that bigger facility opens, they're gonna need to have adequate security. So I doubt they're thinking of it like that. They'll probably figure out the budget closer in.
do
But-
we want to think about anything about, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But about what's happening with either the state or the city budget? You know, the discussions that are happening, which of course we don't have a state budget, but
Well,
or
the
a
state
city
bu-
budget for that matter.
Yeah, state budget, I mean, we should be hearing, I mean, we're hearing, you know, unconfirmed reports, what's in it,
Right.
what's not.
As soon as
but-
they get unhacked, right?
Yeah, I mean, that'll all be finalized in the coming days, I'm sure. It's already 3 weeks late practically, so,
So regarding this also, this request came from two places, not only the community, but from the local precinct.
correct, yeah.
Yeah, because they spend a lot of time, well, they were spending a lot of time, like at the women's facility.
Yeah.
You know, it's much better than I do that. Sometimes they would come there for real requests, sometimes they would come there for arbitrary things. But either way, the precinct spent nearly their entire time at some of these facilities and where that diverts public safety from other places, so.
Yep.
The thought was in hand with what the community is requesting, what they're seeing over there, and with the NYPD. A localized, specialized resource from the Department of Homeland Services, making the most sense. And that's why it has not only sticking points from the community, but also from NYPD. I know it doesn't read like that here.
Can you scroll that back down? No, the other way. Not that far. There.
It's
Blur.
the same thing,
Okay.
but
Maybe it makes sense that this, I mean, is it more impactful that this also came from another city agency like NYPD?
I mean, that could be mentioned, I mean, unfortunately, I mean, I wouldn't put that in for this year's because the site that they were
Right.
speaking to.
Time
is
has changed.
temporarily closed, but I do think that that's a consideration when it goes to reopen, so I don't know. We should probably check to see when it's slated to reopen, if it's gonna be within fiscal 26. Then yes, we should mention that in there, otherwise I would generalize and say, and we also don't know how many other facilities might open, whether they be temporary or permanent sites, because the city hasn't been, you know, they have a tendency to just kind of try to open them wherever they can find the real estate. I mean, they tried to do it over at that hotel at the Renwick Hotel, and that got shot down because of some union issues, but they don't really give the community any feedback or any hearings or any kind of sessions on that stuff.
Or even any notice sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, yeah, I mean, sometimes you find out maybe a couple of days or a week before they're, you know, set to open something. Or NYPD, I usually hear from NYPD and they usually hear about it like, you know, maybe 30 days out. But, you know, I think to that, you know, based on all of that, and the fact that there is no public review process for opening a shelter, that's what, you know, that to me also, you know, should, you know, say that security concerns, you know, DHS police, or peace officers or whatever they want to call them now, you know, should be a budget consideration, you know, for the entire city.
Do DHS, we have any kind of autonomy within DHS, or DHS just allocates, it just?
I mean, I don't really know. It's been very difficult to get an org chart or any kind of clarity as to how the agency functions. You know, even talking to people within DHS, and I think now it's kind of integrated with DSS, the Department of Social Services. So I'm not even sure how much, you know, what's DHS versus DSS. Brendan, you don't happen to know, do you?
I mean, they're all in the same agency
Okay.
family, DHS,
Yeah.
DASS, NHRA.
Yeah, so all of those agencies are kind of have similar responsibilities, so I don't know where things sit within the budget. Or even as far as operations within the city. It seems like it's a moving target. And with the migrants, it's very difficult to get any kind of answers.
But the other thing I'll say is if the agency we listed were incorrect, we would be told.
Okay,
We've been told in the past, if you've been told in the past, if we've directed a budget request to the wrong agency, please direct this request to a different agency.
mhm,
So,
And so Justin, because the response this year was, please contact us for more information.
so it is the
I think
correct.
isn't it worth
yeah,
at least reaching out to them and, you know, saying,
Yeah.
can you please give us more information? They may be able to share a lot of answers to the questions we're asking,
mhm.
and then we can tailor or rephrase our request.
So the
accordingly.
And
agency,
the office can do that.
okay,
Yeah.
We can just, start by saying, what more information do you have to offer? And
Yeah.
then go from there.
yeah, I would definitely try to get, you know, and let them understand, you know, where this is coming from and all of that.
And that I think I would be uncomfortable trying to put in a budget request if we don't understand how the agency is going to actually exploit it.
Well, yeah, I mean, what we're saying is that, you know, we've seen examples where the private security is inadequate. But
But we don't know what they would do with the funding if we got it for them, right?
Well, if our request is specific enough, then we do know.
Well,
Or for expanded DHS.
well, I
police
think they would
program.
have to go out and hire more peace officers. A lot of these are retired police officers or other, you know, ex-law enforcement members that, I mean, they're basically unarmed and, you know, fully trained security professionals, which, you know, there's just no staff for right now, which is, I think, part of the reason that they've consolidated to 30th Street.
Sure, we always had challenges getting someone from DHS to speak to us. It'd be
There
great if
is,
you guys get a hold of
um,
somebody.
It's not DHS anymore, but there is a new person, Brandon, do you know, that replaced Leilani?
Leilani is still at the agency, but like our new intergov person.
No, I think Leilani,
She's still there.
no, she moved.
I thought she moved.
Regardless.
Yeah, she went to another,
Well,
took another job, but I met the person and the name escapes me. But it's somebody from DSS, Intergov or
Yeah.
External Affairs or whatever.
though the other thing is the budget registers that the community board gets tends to list a specific agency contact person
Mhm.
for the budget requests themselves, so. We
Yeah.
might not end up reaching out just to our intergov person, but.
Yeah,
To the agency contact who might say what they'd say
yeah, I mean,
when.
a lot of times
I'm
the,
just saying, we're trying to help them.
yeah.
They need to at least,
Well, the agency is on, a lot of times the agencies will only, you know, speak to whatever is within their budget presently. A lot of times they're not gonna be like, oh, well, you know, if we had, you know, extra money, we could do X, Y, and Z. Doesn't usually work that like that. They're like, this is what's funded and this is how it's operating today is probably the most you get from them. That it would take an elected official with knowledge of, you know, of their operations to be able to, you know, go in and that's where the budget teams will work, you know, based on some of the feedback. And that's part of the problem is most people in the city council are as clueless as we are.
So, another thought, I'm just thinking about in a lot of the situations where there is a need for security, sometimes the having a cop respond is not necessarily the best option. And I'm just thinking about, some new things, new efforts on de-escalation. And I wonder if there are other agencies who are going to be even more cash strapped, than the NYPD. I acknowledge that. But I wonder if we can have some creative thinking, because as you say, people, every agency, like they look within their own walls, right? They look in their own sort of columns, and maybe there's some way that we can think about, and again, especially, thinking what we heard from our speaker earlier, that one of the things I thought was probably most valuable in what they do was this whole connection, looking between all these things. So maybe if there's some way we can serve that role and say, or figure out somebody who can and say, okay, DHS police, they don't have any money.
Well, again, DHS police are peace officers that were existing primarily to de-escalate situations peacefully. So that, I think that was part of the issue there, that
The appeal of them, yeah.
that was, yeah, and that's exactly why we felt that they were needed in more facilities.
Yeah.
Because if you don't de-escalate something peacefully, now you have
Then it gets ugly.
now you have robberies, now you have felonious crimes
Yeah.
that are occurring unnecessarily. And of course, we want anybody who's in the shelter system to feel safe. Because otherwise they're gonna stay on the streets, which poses even more problems for them and for the community. So, all right, so we should try to wrap this conversation up. As far as next steps, is there any other information that you guys want to gather before, or do we want to tweak this, leave everything as is? And is there any,
For
is there-
operational expense, right? You said it was 21 out of 25.
Yes, that is correct.
I liked what we were talking about before about, you talking about the study, how some of this core records are public. About the efficacy of some of these programs and see if they revisit the system again. I don't know if it's a good use of it. I'm kind of throwing it out there. Is something that is it worth exploring an operational expense of a study? Cause like.
You know what? That is such a great idea. Land use always gets the fellows. Maybe we should get one who can do this kind of work.
I mean,
Is there an agency that funds that though?
Well,
Who are we requesting?
well, I mean, that generally, if, Brendan, how does a community board fellow or somebody come about? Is that something that the chair, or is that something the board office spends money on?
I'm not 100% sure. That's something I need to ask Jesus.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example on the, I'm gonna mess up the details here, forgive me, but with the, community one, I believe, the person knew of a consultancy
Mhm.
and reached out to them, and they had a fellow in that organization, and to on-ramp them, this was like just a great timing for them to take on a new project, collecting all this
Mhm.
information. So that was a case of like, this person knew that consultancy, that knew they had a new hire, graduated and wanted to take on a nice preliminary project like the community study. That we don't have because we don't have a communication or relationship with like a consultancy that does public safety.
No, but maybe, I was sort of joking before when I was talking about it, but like maybe, maybe somebody at John Jay, like there may either,
Might be a grad student or somebody out there.
yeah,
And yeah, that could be,
Yeah.
either a consultancy or John Jay. John Jay means we would have to have some relationship with an advisor there. who focuses on things like this. Cause, they would have a better breadth of the capabilities of executing for someone who wants to take on a master's program of thesis of, a community study of court cases and efficacy and so on and so forth. This is like, that's like literally the struggle for every master's student to find. a
Right,
thesis.
right. That's why I'm thinking that.
So like, if we have a relationship with anyone at like, say, John Jay or any of the Coonies and
Mhm.
SUNYs,
I mean, there's probably somebody studying it already and we wouldn't know.
it's a little hard to look up. Actually, a lot of those studies are locked down, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's something that's targeted for our community, even Midtown.
yeah,
I think a lot of times they don't, they don't have to have any affiliation with the community. I mean,
No,
to want the research, experience.
but well,
Hmm.
I just kind of reeling it back, part of the budget request. Would it make sense to put something like an operational expense of a study of the public safety, of the efficacy, of the court cases, of some of these programs? Don't have a dollar amount, don't even know what agency,
Yeah, I don't even know.
but at least
I
something on the
mean, that
board.
could be a ProPublica thing, right?
But something on the board, because this goes to an elected official, you'll see that public safety wants this information.
Mhm.
And maybe some guidance, let's just do, I hate to say it, but like a level 0, we want some kind of study.
Yeah,
These programs sound great, these efforts sound great, but like it all originates to where do we want our budget requests to go to, where are these the most effective?
mhm.
And the better informed we are, the better we'll feel confident.
Yeah, because I
Or
think
do-
that's the preliminary step to, suggesting more funds for the
Right.
courts.
And it'll back our requests even
Yeah.
stronger with data, with research.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and maybe it would even be the state level.
Yeah.
Was the state, just the state courts usually, so.
a study would make sense, because we're inundated
But
with a lot of
this
stuff.
budget request is for the city.
Right.
Right, so.
Yeah, I mean, but
That might be a separate channel, but this,
So,
what goes in
I just
the,
want to put it on
yeah,
paper, or
what
like
goes in
something.
this is the city.
City,
I'll,
yes.
I'll put it in the minutes that this is something we want to follow up on and think about, if not here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Sandy seemed receptive to having a process for, similar process for state funds. That goes specifically to the electeds, whether it's our board or all of the boards that do it. It seems like there's just, it's word of mouth with the assembly members and state senators.
And in fact, that study, if it's done well, I could probably back the rest of this budget.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think that's having the evidence and,
Mhm.
making it look like we're not just operating most of.
Right. I think so too.
So
Brendan?
just to be clear, are we creating a new budget request or are we looking into information that might result in a budget request? Just wanna make sure,
I think the idea is, the premise is there for a new budget, whether it's a budget request or whether it would be better directed to a nonprofit. I mean, because technically, if the city were to fund a study, I mean, it would
No,
probably.
Oh, wait, are we talking about that or about these? Now I'm really confused.
no, I'm requesting a new budget request. If we
Right,
find ourselves that
15.
it's
Got it.
that requires funding, or we find ourselves of a very ambitious master student, that's somewhere down the line, but just to
Yeah.
put it on paper. That
That
it
the
crosses
board-
someone, that the board, electeds,
Uh-huh.
we're requesting this is a good step. We don't know the price tag, that's fine, we'll figure that out later.
Right,
But,
Yeah.
so you're proposing that the board be empowered to hire someone if there is no
At
other.
least start this
Yeah.
conversation, maybe someone
That's a
better than.
sneaky way to get it in front of everybody too. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe someone knows the John Jay advisors.
Yeah.
Criminal study and
I
program
mean,
efficacy, or
we could invite John Jay and see if anybody wants to come present to us.
I don't even know where to begin, that school's huge.
I mean, I'm sure they have a community,
They definitely do.
contact.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure they have studies on some of this stuff. They may not be made public because they're,
Is
There's a
that-
lot of things too.
Is
It's
that
not-
Liz's district?
sure.
It's not only John Jay, that's the big one, but
Yeah.
there are other coonies that
Mhm.
do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I wouldn't even specifically say John Jay, it would just be more
That's a
like
big
an
obvious
academic,
Or
an academic
Vera,
study.
but there is often a lot of work that's done that no one ever gets to see because no one,
Right.
and I think that any of these entities would find some profit in collaborating with the community board.
Mhm.
Because all of
Yeah.
a sudden, voice will have some traction.
Yeah, I think it's also important that we be careful where we choose our source. The school makes sense.
Mhm.
There's, I forgot the term, but there's no duplicity, I don't wanna say duplicity, but, there's no conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Right, some of
Appropriate.
the organizations may have.
There's
a
no evil
specific,
intent.
They have no reason to
Right,
want one thing or another.
right, so, but
Okay.
I digress.
So-
Additional requests.
All right, so back to Brendan's question, we're not adding anything at this juncture, are
But,
we?
but I think we should think about how we can put that in there, like how we can, especially if we combine the security cameras, how do you word kind of our interest in this research as, I mean,
Alright,
it's
but I
not a
just-
capital
I,
expense.
I totally agree. I think the study is a great idea. We should look for the resources to do it.
Yeah.
It's gonna help with our future budget requests, but such a request for such a item does not belong in our city budget request.
Right.
Yeah.
Asking the city to
Yeah.
fund something.
Okay, I thought that's how we got the fellow study done with the.
No, but I think, you know what, it would be great if we could get more information, Brendan. I don't know if this is something
Yeah.
that,
Was done through the leftover funding we had at the end of the year, right?
is it from like what we used, like the
We had a
the
surplus.
street fair money?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I think that was internal as far as the
Okay,
Board of
okay.
Justice funding.
Once again, I would need to check with Jesus
Yeah.
and possibly with, and possibly with our treasurer, Gabe.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that sort of thing, yeah, we can't ask the city to do that, but, I mean,
Yeah.
but potentially that could come out of CD6 funds, but I think that it would be wise for the board to ask around to see if there are studies or anybody that's interested in studying the matter, because we think the results could be very valuable.
Yeah.
Going forward, so I mean, you can't ask the city to do that or the state, because the state would obviously have
That's
a
fair.
true conflict of interest
Yeah.
there.
I wonder, I mean, Jordan, I think was a little flummoxed by our request, but I mean, if anybody's gonna know, maybe it would be somebody at, Justice Innovation. Maybe we should just ask them.
Yeah, I mean, we can ask them. I mean, it just sounds like they're focused on the programming that they're offering and not necessarily the takeaways from.
Correct, but I suspect that, again, having worked in a nonprofit, donors ask these things. And whether, I mean, the information that he provided was, of this many people that went into this program, this many completed it. And kind of this is our reason for not following up. So I suspect they do have that information, or if they have that information for that program,
Well,
but
that's the request,
I-
it's, they provide the program and.
Right, but
it's-
I mean, if anybody's doing this research and it's showing positive results, somebody there knows about it.
Yeah, I got the impression that they're still putting the pieces back together after the pandemic.
Yeah,
'Cause
that makes sense.
they really were more of a court.
No, but I'm not saying, I don't mean at the local level. I'm talking about at the national level is where they're gonna know.
Yeah. I
Because they're
mean,
gonna have some like donor relations or some, financial person that like, if like there's gonna be somebody who's writing grant reports and they're gonna they're probably asking for that information. And if they don't have it for themselves, they may also, they're not just feeling their way. I hope they are actually looking and saying, hey, what, like they talked about the best practices, right? So maybe that's like, okay, where do you get your best practices?
Well, part of the study would be, their programs would be a data point of the study.
Right,
So
exactly.
it would be a source of where we get some of the information to add to the study. The public court system you mentioned is the key component of another source of the data.
Yeah.
And among other programs that's out there in the city, like the Second Chance program and so on and so forth, and see how they're where they're effective. And that one is a lot of footwork.
Yeah.
Legwork to get all that information together. Who does that collection? I think makes sense. I think further discussion makes sense.
Well, if we just start with like recidivism among people who have been through the programs, like that's a start, right?
Well, and the other thing we didn't touch on with them is, you know, is there anything around organized efforts? Because they're treating each individual as an individual, but potentially there could be a bigger underlying organized effort that is utilizing some of these people. Stu, I know you've done some digging with the National Retail Federation, and that's some of what they're finding. So, I think there's definitely an opportunity to find, to invite them back probably in a couple of months and do a deeper dive on some subjects, or, think about the questions and areas that you want to explore. I mean, this was just a preliminary conversation with them, for the first time that the board has met with them since the pandemic, I think. I know the, housing committee has met with them, previously before the pandemic. But, things are taking shape, week by week over there. So I think in the next year or so, they'll come to the table with a little bit more, so.
And I think if we can send them questions in advance, now we've, heard from them once, that would also make it a productive discussion. I mean, not that this wasn't, but a more productive.
Yeah, I mean, we asked them to kind of, give us an overview and talk a little bit of how they're handling the low level quality of life offenses. But yeah, I mean, that can be, the next conversation with them is just prep them. And I think the executive director, or whatever her title is, might be interested in coming as well. So further conversation.
I'd like to hear more from the academics. Initially.
Yeah, and I think, because they're always gonna speak highly of their programming, but I think, in order to keep it balanced, I think you have to understand
Right.
the impact of everything. And
I'd love to hear from the judge.
well, yeah, I mean, that's why I suggested maybe the committee wants to do a site visit over there.
Yeah.
And actually, take a closer hands-on look at what's actually happening and what, and see what they're willing to show you. So. All right, so first budget request, no changes at this point, or anything that we want to, this can still be addressed next month, right? And still make okay, so.
Yeah, we're starting this process very early
Yeah.
because we don't want to have it be the last minute thing like this year.
It
Right.
still will be.
Yeah, I mean, there's always other things that will pop up, or somebody will say, what about this? But, I will do some digging on the process for the security cameras, both as far as how the locations are decided and, from a practical view of where they might be needed, from what NYPD is suggesting. And then,
And the office is following up with
Well,
DHS.
and I also want to know, I mean, this is a tangent, but there's a distinction between crime and protest.
well,
And
yes.
I want to know that these are not surveillance protests.
No, I mean, I think for protests, I mean, almost every officer will have body cam footage within a protest. I think that's where most of your surveillance would come from. Because they're required to.
I don't know, I mean, I see the cameras around Union Square Park, that are not traffic cameras and.
Well, I mean, Union Square is just it's a big public space, so I don't know, I mean.
I don't know.
That's always like, that's just, you know what, if you're concerned about, you know, being filmed, walk around with a bag on your head. I mean, it's like, it really, or an umbrella as the Chinese did, right? But I just feel like that it's not a reason to not put a camera. I completely agree with you about privacy issues, but it's gonna be how the government uses it, like that's down the road.
I would take it almost a step back when you do reach out to the commander is not so focused on cameras, but where is the state of, where does he see the public safety solution for these parks? Because for example, and this is purely based on the renovation that happened at Bellevue South,
Right,
you know, renovating and trimming out the trees, you know, really giving it focused attention,
yeah.
just completely transformed that space.
Mhm.
And that's not with a camera. Like if you
Right.
left that park alone and added 1, 2, 6 cameras, I don't know if it would have
Right,
done anything. His request might be like, well, if the Parks Department just cut back this tree, that tree, or this, you know, maybe it's a chance to cross pollinate. His advice we should get from him isn't necessarily cameras, should be what is the public safety solution to these parks? We thought it's
Mhm.
cameras.
well, yeah, to your point, the community is always asking for cameras anytime they perceive something to be unsafe. But I will, you know, as I say all the time, cameras are generally an investigative tool.
Right.
They are generally accessed one after a crime occurs to determine who did it. And information leading up to arrests. And building a case for the district attorney. That's primarily what a camera is used for. So, I mean, it's not like the police sit there. I mean, sure, I was in the precinct earlier, 17th, and sure, they have access to the cameras. They can turn them on, but do they? Almost never. I mean, unless they're watching this, if they see a protest is forming and they need to allocate resources. It's very rare that they sit at the desk and actually look at the cameras.
Right.
And there's a little bit more surveillance downtown at One Police Plaza where they have the big center there, but even there's TV screens that have cameras from all over the city and they're not
Or
really monitored.
Well, but this is
Well,
always
or the
been-
Trump trial there's probably some video viewing for that area.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, they're gonna have cameras, you know, they're in a situation like that, they're gonna be looking at Trump Tower, they're gonna be looking down at the forts. You know, to see, you know, they already have pens set up for that, for both, you know, protesters, members of the public, media and whatnot. So they know what to expect there. But yeah, I mean, anytime, you know, there's a citywide issue, that's primarily the only
His
reason.
point is exactly
Yeah.
target. I
Yeah.
mean, people, you know, our perceptions just
Yeah.
are often not.
Right, and there is a need for, you know, there are needs for cameras in many places, but it's not necessarily a deterrent for quality of life problems, and it's not necessarily a deterrent for crime, because I'll be honest with you, there's cameras on virtually every block of the city,
There is?
maybe between public and private, yeah. Yeah,
Well, yeah, I just don't want us to get focused on cameras.
Yeah.
When
Right.
it's.
No, I think,
Because-
Steve, your idea about like, what are the solutions? But as Matt says, you know, this is what the community asks for. But
Because-
can we continue this conversation? I have to get off this meeting for like
Yeah, we're way
4
late.
different reasons.
So yeah, I will
Or I
just say,
can, or I can leave.
no, I mean, we're just about done here, unless anybody has any items of old or new business.
Did you have a chair's report?
Not really. I think we covered everything that I would have said within the context of the meeting, so TBD on next month's agenda. Still, are we?
I mentioned the National Retail Federation to the executive committee,
Okay.
and they smiled. But we have to talk to the NS
Yeah,
in our.
right, to see if they're,
If they'll talk to us, yeah, and if they'll, you know, have a representative, and I think if they do, then we've got a good direction to go.
okay, yeah,
And I also, of course, mentioned my favorite, the trip hazard issue,
yes.
which is Brendan's favorite.
Yeah.
And the executive committee
Yeah,
was
so-
aware of that as well.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
yeah, sidewalks at private properties not getting repaired.
So basically,
Oh.
the onus is on the property owner until it isn't, but then the city isn't necessarily required to step in. They just have the option to step in and make the repairs if they feel it's necessary.
So
But
Yeah.
And then they bill the owner back, right?
if they were to actually do anything, but in most cases, we haven't.
Nothing happens.
Where there's
Their,
any
their
city.
policy is to do it only in front of 1, 2, and 3 family houses, and
Mhm.
that's it.
Yeah,
Right.
Doesn't usually, the way that usually gets taken care of is if the property has insurance, the insurer requires the property.
Right.
To do any kind of remediation, because they don't want a claim of somebody who's a, so like, I don't know why
Right.
that is.
But if the property owner and property manager are negligent, then, the
I
city,
guess if they don't have insurance.
or they're just not physically present in this area and, they have, a person or so that takes care of the property. That just does the basic maintenance. A lot of times they're not owned by people who live locally. So I think,
Right, it doesn't matter. I'm thinking, if you're insured as a building, the
well,
insurance claim, they will come out and they will tell you exactly what you need to do, or they'll say, we'll cancel your policy. So,
well,
I don't.
yeah, I
I don't
sometimes
know if
don't
that's the
see,
reality.
I don't
And
see
they-
that.
I mean, I'm
happening.
dealing with that in my condo.
Yeah.
building right
And
now,
they-
so yeah,
and they
it's
will-
how, that's how it works.
And they, well, in some.
Or they change you say, okay, now your
They
insurance.
would also,
costs
the
this much.
insurer would also have to know that a notice of violation was issued.
Right.
You don't need a violation. They inspect it themselves.
Well, if they're notified properly, but a lot
No,
of times,
when they renew your policy, they won't renew your policy unless,
yeah.
I mean, this is what we're doing right now with my
All right,
building.
well,
Is we have to renew our policy. They come out and say, well, to renew your policy, you need to do X, Y, and Z.
all right, well, that can be next
So
month's
it might be,
conversation.
it might be something to think about, like.
All right, so here we are 14 before 9 o'clock, so I think we'll adjourn unless anybody has any objections.
And just think, I offered to take minutes. I thought it was gonna be a short meeting.
Good move. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Ann.
Ann,
My pleasure.
and thank you all.